All right, excited to be here today with my new friend, Alex Branson. Alex, let me give you a quick intro. He's a visionary leader at Beatport, driving innovative tools like Amp Suite and LabelRadar to empower artists, labels, and suppliers globally. He pioneered international growth at Empire. He built platforms like Warner Music's LevelMusic.com, and he's a trailblazer in music tech. He advises Facebook and co-founded the UK's first digital distribution company while shaping DSP agreements for AIM. So today I'm really excited to connect with him and talk a little bit more about what he's doing at Beatport with LabelRadar and Beatport Studio to help independent artists like yourself. So Richard, thank you so much for taking time. Alex, thank you so much for taking time to be here today.
That's okay. Trust me, everybody wished I was called Richard Branson and had all of his private islands.
I didn't even put that together, but that must have been like a subliminal a slip there that happened.
Yeah, it's quite all right. My brother's actually called Richard, and one of my favorite things to do in business meetings, if he calls me, is just to hang up. It's a real power play. It's fabulous.
I'm sure you have a lot of fun with that, Richard Branson. And people never get confused. Cool. Well, Alex, maybe to get started with, for anyone who this is the first time meeting you or connecting with you, could you share just a quick introduction to yourself and how you got started at Beatport?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been doing this a long time. I started working in the music industry in the late 90s. So that is a while ago, it feels. And I've had an interesting career, mostly on the record side, but also on the song side with publishing. Technology has been a large part of it, and I think that I ended up at Beatport partly because the current CEO is a chap called Rob McDaniels, who is the founder of a company called Ingrooves, and he brought me into that company, and we spent nearly a decade together building that. That's now called Virgin Music Group. So if you're not familiar, you probably know Virgin. It was acquired by Universal. And so he then became CEO of Beatport, and at some point brought me in to help run the M&A process for LabelRadar and Amp Suite. And I definitely can't take credit for the brilliance of those two platforms, but I'm enjoying developing them from their original sort of foundation. So, we completed the transactions, and he asked me to come in and run them. And they basically are the sort of centerpieces for a division of the company that I currently run.
Cool. Man, mergers and acquisitions it's a world that I would love to understand better, because it seems like it's like you start getting into some like real big boy business kind of territory when you're talking about mergers and acquisitions.
It does feel very grown up. The sums of money, are not normal to most people, and yeah, there's a lot of risk. There's a lot riding on it, but it's such a practiced art now that you really step through a process. And it's not that you can't make mistakes, of course you can, but you're quite thorough. I mean, the process of due diligence, allows for that. So yeah, I enjoy doing them, I have to say. I've done a few now, and it's something I learned though on the job, not something I learned at school or in some sort of banking career. So yeah, it's fun.
Cool. Yeah, I wonder, in terms of like a music artist's career, what the closest thing to like mergers and acquisitions would be in terms of their journey. I guess like if they had their catalog acquired, or if like major record label kind of deals.
Yeah, that's it. I've had a friend of mine just sold a catalog. He created a children's music brand, I suppose, and catalog, and sold that to one of the majors for a decent sum of money, enough to buy himself an Aston Martin. So yeah, I think he learned a lot through that process, because he's not from that world, and he brought in an advisor. That's the sort of work that I have done in the past.
Awesome. Well, one thing I'd love to pick your brain about is just kind of the current scope of the music industry for independent artists. And with your background in music and working with so many artists, I'm sure you're starting to see some similarities in terms of some of the common challenges or mistakes or issues. And so from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges that artists are facing right now that maybe are part of the seed reason that you started doing what you're doing with Beatport?
Yeah, sure. I always think about this as I remember the time before the internet, and I think access is a wonderful thing. It's democratized the ability to have a career. It wasn't really like that before. It was a very sort of tight group at the top of that pyramid that made their way through. And I think that therefore the challenges of fandom haven't changed. There's only so many hours in the day for a music fan to listen to music. Of course, access allows you to listen to a much more varied amount of music. So whilst it's improved on one side, I don't know that it's become easier for everybody to have a successful career in music. That competition element is still there, and because of that, there's lots of fun and innovative bits of technology out there to help rise above the noise. And so I'm sure I've listened to a few of your episodes, and it often gets talked about that ability to stand out amongst what is a lot of music going onto the platforms, trying to reach the ears of a fan base. So personally, I think there's a few different ways that you can kind of make your way through. And I ran a podcast for a while, and I had this sort of phrase on there that I used to talk about, which was the only thing that's really important is the artist and the fan, right? And the music that they make. Everything else is either improving that relationship or getting in the way. And so I think that's the same for both sides. If you think about it from a fan's point of view, there's so many different ways that you can kind of indulge yourself in music, and for the artist, they've got to go and find these people on all of those multiple platforms, and that's really seems to be the current challenge. I guess to bring it into the Beatport frame, and if you're not familiar with Beatport, it's a 20-year-old download store, really providing high quality audio files to the DJ community for that period of time. Today it's much more than that, which is the things that I kind of get myself involved with. And really, my goal is to make sure that there is a continuous supply of good quality music to the store. And as we just talked about, that whole world has got a bit more democratized than it ever was before. Dance music by nature is electronic music. Therefore, anyone with a MacBook computer theoretically can make good quality dance music. You don't have the same restrictions that you do perhaps with audio capture on a microphone for a drum kit or something like that in a studio, where you need a bit more time and effort, I think, to get the actual recording down. And so there's just a lot of music, and we have a couple of other businesses in the producer community, Loop Masters, Loop Cloud, which is sort of sample libraries, things that you can integrate into your DAW, and then Plugin Boutique, which is the plugins side of it. And so really I pick up the story when the music comes out the studio. And, as a musician, Michael, it's like, what do you do? And in dance music, there's normally two paths. Typically want to start with trying to get signed to one of the large independent dance labels, the likes of Defected, Toolroom, Monster Cat, etc. There's a bunch of them. That's quite hard unless you know somebody there. And so one of the products that we bought was a company called LabelRadar. Shout out to Derek and Ed, who are founders there, who work with me still today. Built a brilliant platform to solve one of the hardest things I think that the industry has created for itself, which is demo submission. And just anecdotally, when I worked at Sony in the 90s, these demos would turn up in jiffy bags, sometimes a mini disc, sometimes a CD, etc. And they would go into the post room. The post room would then deliver them around to all the different offices. The ones that landed at Incredible, which is the dance label I work for, they'd go on somebody's desk, and quite honestly, they just went straight in the bin. And this was the sort of time-old problem. There just isn't that level of capacity to listen to everything. Also, the other problem with that model of physically sending a demo is that there's no consistency in what you receive. I've just mentioned the different formats, but also information, like who is this artist, what's their story, why are they sending it to you, is this something you should spend your time listening to? LabelRadar has standardized all of that. So in the sort of parlance of the internet, an artist has a profile, and with all the sort of links out to Instagram and all the rest of it that you typically have these days. So from a label's point of view, they're looking at something in an environment that's standardized. It's familiar to a certain degree or level, because they're all sort of looking for the same sorts of things, these A&R folks, right? We also encourage a more fluid approach to listening to music. The artist selects the 20 seconds that they think best represents the track. And so when the A&R person gets to listen to, Defected have something like 1,000 demos sent to them a week. It's impossible to listen to all of that, right? So they now have this sort of playlist style environment on their side, on the label side, so they can listen through these 20-second clips while they're perhaps answering emails or doing something else. So it's a very easy way for them to get through it all. And if they like it, obviously they can stop and then listen to the whole track. They can then go and look at the artist profile, and that's when they sort of start to dig. That's when they really start to sort of engage with it. The brilliant thing that the guys did, though, because obviously any of that could be done, fairly easily, was that they understood that the artist was sending it to a label because they know what the label is, who the label is, and they're a fan. They're probably buying the records from, Toolroom or whoever, Hospital Records or whatever. And so the label shouldn't ignore them, right? That's a good fan relationship to have there. Also, you might find, the next track for your label, but it's also not just the tracks, it's the artists themselves. Labels like Hospital Records, Defected, they develop artists. They're not just sort of picking up tracks and putting them out. So that's really like their use case for it. And so every time they listen to a piece of music, that's communicated straight away back to the artist. So the artist doesn't have that sort of like set in my offline version of send the jiffy bag out the door and never hear anything ever again. This way you know that those labels have actually heard you, and their action from there is either to get in contact and to say, great, let's look at signing the record. They can also do other things, like they can add the artist to what we call a watch list, so that if you think about it from the artist's point of view, they've been heard by the label that they're a fan of, and they potentially have been added to this watch list. The label has had to do nothing other than click 2 buttons in that process. So we now have this platform that has simplified this whole process. And if you think about what's happened at that point, is a relationship has been made between the artist and the label. And from there, you can build upon that, right? Any good relationship never is just one thing. It normally develops. And so we have now probably most of the big remix competitions that are running through the platform, because that's the other thing that the label can do. They can host a remix competition. Remix competitions are a fantastic way of, one, testing out your skills as a producer, because you get the stem pack as part of the process. So you get new sounds, new things to play with. You obviously have the recording as a sort of benchmark reference file to then think about, what would I do to improve, change, enhance, take it in a new direction, or whatever it might be. And for the label, this is fantastic, right? Because they get a chance to crowdsource repertoire, get to know artists in a different way, like how creative are they, how fast can they react to these sort of competitions that can be posted and have a short window with which to receive demos for. So we've built a very healthy environment between labels and artists. The other thing that we just added was a thing called Artist Network. So the artists themselves, we have 250,000 artists on the platform, 3,500 record labels on the other side. And this is all dance music, pretty much. There's very little kind of other genres in there. And the labels are all verified. We know them all. We have, regular communication with them. Is that the artists now can communicate between each other, and they can collaborate. They can mark themselves as open in a sort of similar way that you might do on a social network. And it's created a really healthy environment. Artists can leave reviews about the labels. So, if there's a label they didn't have a good experience with, for example, they can do that. And so it's a sort of very sort of trustful, environment. So that's LabelRadar. Do you want me to carry on explaining some of the other things that we do?
I mean, I would love to, and there's a lot to unpack with what you just shared. It sounds amazing, and so just to sort of recap, I mean, one thing that you shared that I thought was really interesting was you started with talking about how, like, so much of the music industry is really about that connection between the artist and the fan, like the two most important people in that relationship. And everything, else is sort of designed to either facilitate and help those connections, or to to break it, it's getting in the way. And it just kind of struck me that it sounds like what you're describing right now, that that you're a part of now, with LabelRadar, is kind of like that, but for like record labels and artists, and that you're like connecting record labels and artists, and really like the function is to help those two parties come together in a way that previously the communication was very poor. It was hard to know, like, have they seen my music? Like, the communication wasn't there. But now, because of this platform, you've been able to build a real community between those networks, and it sounds awesome. That was really cool.
Yeah, and I've just remembered your original question, which I promise I will try and answer, which is, if you think about what we started saying, or I started saying about the kind of challenges for an artist is how do you get heard? It's very,
Mm,
very difficult to rise above the noise, but the record labels, especially in dance music, are very practiced at knowing how to take a record to market. They also
mm,
have typically alongside their label brands community that they can take your artist's brand, if you like, into, and that access to that community is then how you build a fan base around an artist, as well, right? So the labels are very important. They're incredibly important to Beatport and its success in general. And so Label Radar, I think, has been a huge success for them. They felt very supported in a world where, of course, we all know that independent artists can just access Spotify by going to a TuneCore or similar type of platform. So, the world is changing all around us all the time, and everybody's just sort of adapting. But so being signed to a label, I think, is helpful to rise above the noise. The other thing that we do, and it's typical of dance music, is that you start that way typically. Music comes out of the studio, you go to a record label who then put some records out, and you build a bit of brand and a bit of a buzz, and maybe if you're a DJ as well, you get some gigs off the back of that, etc. And there's always a point where you get better at your craft and you make better music. And there's always a point where there's just kind of too much for other labels to, or maybe you want to try a different style. That's pretty typical. The idea of having multiple monikers in dance music as a producer is very, very common. And so there's often a point where an artist will get to where they think, you know what, I'm going to set my own label up. I'm doing these club nights and I've got this kind of brand. So I'm going to do a little label. I've got some friends who also produce, and then you're a businessman, right? Person. It's like, well, how did that happen? I was at one point just happy in my sort of bedroom studio making beats, right? And now I'm running a company. Did I mean to do that? And that bit's often, I think, a thing that catches artists out when they do that, because all of a sudden it's a very different set of disciplines you've got to learn. It's not just about making music and promoting it and marketing the music. Yeah, that's a whole thing in itself. But if you're then involving others, even if they're your friends, you should have a contract. You should agree who did what, right? And so the Amsuite platform, which is the other sort of route in, if you like, is everything you need. It starts with a contract. Contract information is in a database. Contract goes out to the artist. The artist gets their own dashboard. All of the kind of transparency is there, from the feedback from DJs goes all the way back down to the artist if the label wants. It's got trend reports, and all of your eventual royalty statements go in there as well. And that's very low lift for the label, because they don't really have to do too much. Once they've done the contract and the sales start coming in, whether it's from digital or physical or whatever it might be, they just load those statements up into the platform, and it creates all the artist level royalty statements. Same for publishing, same for naming rights. And what we try and do is help these typically artist run labels is become a publisher. You should. Don't leave that money on the table, because if you do, you can't reinvest it back into either your own artistic endeavors or the company that you started. So these are the sorts of things that we're trying to do at Beatport to just make the lives of anyone that's serious about this easier. So yes, that's what we try and do.
awesome. Really cool. Yeah. So it sounds like with Label Radar, you've helped to improve communication between record labels and artists, and be able to sync them up in a world that was getting really messy and kind of hard to communicate. And also, you're helping to just organize the business side of things as well for record labels and for artists, so that they you can spend more time being creative and focusing on their music, and not lose sight of the important business work as well.
Yep, that's exactly it.
Now, I would love to kind of zoom out a little bit, and whenever I have an opportunity to connect with someone like yourself that just has a lot more perspective and like experience than I have in the music industry and like the history of it. Also, right now we're sort of in like a crazy revolutionary time where like a lot of things are changing with generative AI and independence as well. So yeah, I'm curious just to hear your perspective on what's happening right now in the market as it relates to like independent artists and like generative AI. Like, where do you think that it's headed? And if someone's listening to this right now, that's an indie artist or an independent record label that might be like listening or watching this right now, and they're kind of wanting to swim along with the wave that's cresting. Do you have any thoughts about where things are headed?
Yes, many thoughts. I don't think we quite have enough tape in the machine for it, but at the
Mm.
moment, there is a heightened awareness of this kind of new ability to make a lot of music very, very quickly. There's a lot of pushback from the industry about it, and I've been around for long enough to have seen this sort of trend before when new technology comes in. I lived through the conversion from physical to digital, for example, and Napster, and all of the music was available on the internet all of a sudden, and the industry's reaction to that was, let's shut it down. Right, this can't exist. This is not healthy for our business. I'm not saying that that's exactly what AI is. I think it's a very different type of thing, but you can see a lot of the narrative that happens in the press is, AI music is bad. That sort of generalization is incredibly dangerous because you start to oversimplify it and also alienate people that are genuinely trying to do something innovative and interesting, and taking music creation forward. So I think as a distribution's part of what we do, for example, and we have a responsibility to the likes of Spotify and Deezer, and of course Beatport, and we don't want that sort of prompt-led, make me a track that sounds like Calvin Harris and Sasha, right? Whatever the prompt is that you've put, and then you just get a track. Like, to me, I think to pretty much everybody, that's not creative. It's also not something that can be protected under copyright at the moment, because there was no human creation in that, and so you can't attach IP to it. So as a consequence, that really can't form part of the agreements that sit between a label and a distributor and a DSP, for example, because all the way along you're saying, I own this repertoire, but you can't own it if you didn't actually create it, right? So that's kind of one of the biggest problems. So we are currently testing some technology to identify music that is coming out of I think it's about 8 different main services that create AI generated music. And it's not to say that, and certainly not to say, in fact, and we've made a public statement alongside major record companies, that we don't think that this technology is interesting, and it absolutely is likely to be part of the future creation of music. If you think about it, at the moment, our Loop Cloud product, that's probably one of the best on the market, but it still means that when you're in your DAW, you're having to go through libraries to find that snare hit, right? That you've heard a track that, you know what, I'd love that in my record. You can now just probably use an AI tool to go and create that snare hit, right? So I think that will improve the creation of music. It will be an evolution. It won't happen overnight, but I think it'll probably happen fairly rapidly. Similar for plugins, if you know there's a particular sound that you like out there, go and make it. But again, I think in the creation flow, that ability to create something new is the reason why artists make music. That if you're only going to then rely on AI tools just to kind of do all the heavy lifting for you, then I don't see that. I don't see that being a sort of long-lasting thing of the reason why an artist would bother to be an artist. I don't think that's anything other than what is typically called stream mining, where you're just making stuff to go out into the world. And so I think that the technology is really interesting, and I think it's already been implemented quite well in certain areas. We've obviously got this other problem, but I think that there's enough pushback collectively and a general consensus, I think, in the industry, that we don't just want the sort of prompt-based 100% music that no real human interaction has been played for. There's obviously all that other stuff, the new US Act, Train Act, that is all about identifying whether platforms used your intellectual property to train the model. And we've been looking at, what does it mean to potentially, license and have, continuing royalties through to the original rights holders by helping to train some of these models. But that flow has to kind of exist in the same way as if you licensed a sample to a record. Yeah, it might be a buyout that you might do, but there's also might be a bit of songwriting, right? If it is a significant enough sample. And you might negotiate part of that publishing as well as ongoing royalties from the sale and exploitation of the recording. So again, to me, we're just at this like early juncture. It'll take a while, it'll settle down, there'll be some regulation, we'll all agree what we're supposed to be doing, we'll go back to normal, and then the next thing will come. So it's, with all these things, I always hear that thing of, well, that's it for the music industry, that's done. Like, come on. Like, it's just not true. In fact,
Mm.
at my graduation, I was one of the first years to do a music industry management degree, and Morris Oberstein, who used to run CBS Records, did the kind of like speech, I suppose, and he'd lived through sort of Amstrad cassette, copying, CD copying, MP3s, and he said every time somebody said the music industry's done for at this point, it's like
Mm.
still here, still going, it's
Mm.
fine, in fact, growing.
That's super helpful to hear. Yeah, it does seem like history has a tendency to sort of like repeat itself, or at the very least, like there's like patterns that tend to like reemerge, and so it's always helpful to kind of hear like, oh yeah, like this is a similar song and dance like that we've heard before,
Yeah.
and it's have that context coming into it. And it sounds like what you're saying is that there's certain use cases of generative AI, for example, that everyone kind of feels on the same page about. Like, if you just click a button, but there's like no actual like creativity or expression or something that happens through it, then it kind of feels like it's missing the point, or it's kind of losing, a sense of like the purpose of music in the first place. But these are also amazing tools that can really streamline the ability for us to express ourselves, as long as we're using them as tools instead of just using them to replace ourselves entirely. And also, you shared that it's not probably wise to resist or to try to just kill it. It's a natural tendency that we like. It's like, oh, this kind of gets in the way of what we're used to, and it's going to affect our business. And so, like, but if we try to cut it away, then generally that's doesn't tend to work out in the long term. And it's better to sort of embrace these tools and figure out how to ethically use them.
That's it. Exactly that. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, again, those of us that have been around for long enough, know that, and that's why you're seeing people trying to work with it rather than trying to work against it. But yeah, and it's unfortunate, I think, for some of the companies that are trying to do something really good and positive with AI training models, because they run into that narrative of, well, it's AI music, then it's a no. And I think we've got faster and better at resolving that sort of problem. But yeah, it's going to be around for a little while, that sort of
Mm.
negativity towards it, but it'll settle down. I'm not worried.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I guess like to the point that you brought up earlier in terms of challenges, it does sort of like make that problem even worse from a certain extent of like the amount of music available online, how easy it is to put it out. It's like a double-sided sword. So you could say like the marketing or the ability to cut through the noise, or what you're doing in terms of like helping connect the creators with teams that can help them cut through the noise, becomes more and more important in that world.
Yeah, and look, I think the only slight caveat to that is that I think the pandemic was a big sort of teacher to us about this, that music isn't always the same thing. It doesn't have to be a big sort of studio album or a stadium band. There's all this sort of functional music, and it's now been sort of defined like that in the agreements with the likes of Spotify, and study beats and things to do something else to, right?
Mm.
I think that has a
Mm.
legitimate place in the world, right? Because you don't want to be distracted. And I do wonder whether, and people have been talking about this, and we're kind of most of the way there, really, on the sort of two-tiered, model of, sort of frontline commercial artist-driven music, and then that sort of more functional music. And I'm quite supportive of the idea of sort of different rates for that. Why not, right? If somebody wants it, why would you say don't do it? So I think AI probably will make some of those sort of production libraries fatter and bigger and all the rest of
Mm.
it, and maybe it'd be better. I don't know, but yeah, I don't think it replaces an artist being in the world and talking to human beings and playing shows and connecting with real human beings. That like AI can't do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, kind of distinguishing between functional music that's sort of like in the background, or maybe it's made to support like a soundtrack potentially, but it's
Yeah.
not. The important thing isn't about the originality or the actual song at that point, like the fact that it's like artist driven. But that type of music could sort of be like generated automatically, and because it's not really the purpose of it is to build like the community of it. Whereas the other kind of music, the artist driven music, is sort of about building connection and building like a community and like going out to a live show. Like the best part about it isn't like you go to a room by yourself and you like listen to robots and you like sit by yourself and feel sad, but like, or dance to yourself. But it's like you go and you're surrounded by humans and you connect, and it's the community, and it's like that shared essence is what makes it special.
That literally cannot be, replaced by text prompt based music generation. So again, when people worry about these things, don't worry about it, because you've got to understand it in the context of what it all really means. Yeah, it might be slightly eating your lunch in terms of the share of the royalty pot, but the industry will figure that out. They're already doing it. So just have faith in, if you're doing something that people enjoy and people want, then you're good.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, if you just focus on providing value and serving a need to bring people together, then it does tend to autocorrect itself. Awesome. Well, Alex, man, it's been fun connecting and talking a little bit about the state of the music industry right now and what's changing, what hasn't changed, the patterns that have come up, and the platforms that you're helping to grow, to be able to help connect artists with their fans and artists with their record labels. So thank you for taking the time to be here today. And for anyone who is listening to this right now, who's interested in exploring the platforms more, what would be the best place they could go to dive deeper?
For Beatport, just head to beatport.com, and if you look at the footer, all of the links, all the different platforms that we are running are all there, so you can find links to all of those.
Awesome. Yeah, then like always, we'll put all the links in the show notes for easy access. And Alex, thanks again for being on the podcast today.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.